Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The old abandoned house stood at the edge of town like a forgotten relic. Its windows were cracked, the roof sagged in places, and vines had long since claimed the walls, creeping up and over the edges like nature's determined hands, pulling the structure back to the earth. Most of the kids in the neighborhood believed the house was haunted, its shadowy rooms filled with ghosts of the past. But Max wasn't T1 to believe in ghost stories for him. The place was a mystery, a puzzle to be solved. "Are you sure about this, Max?" Emma's soft voice wavered as she peered up at the creaking house, her arms crossed tightly. She was always the cautious one, the skeptic, and Max knew she was only here because she didn't want to leave him and Leo to their own devices. If anyone could keep Max out of trouble, it was Emma. Leo, on the other hand, was already several steps ahead, crouching at the rusted gate and fiddling with his backpack. He wasn't interested in the ghost stories either to him. This was just another excuse to test his new gadgets, his homemade flashlight, a tiny toolkit clipped to his belt, and a device Max didn't even recognize. Max grinned, nudging Emma with his elbow. "Come on, Dan. Tell me you were scared of a little dust and creaky floor." "It's not the dust I am worried about," she muttered, but followed as Max and Leo pushed open the gate with a groaning creak. The front door was locked as expected, but Leo was quick with his tool. A few twists and clicks, and the door gave way, revealing a dark, musty hallway that smelled of stale air and old wood. Max stepped inside first, his sneakers crunching over broken glass and leaves that had blown in through the cracks in the wall. "Whoa," Leo whispered, his eyes wide as he shone his flashlight around. The beams of light danced over peeling wallpaper and furniture covered in thick layers of dust. "This place is ancient. Look at all this old stuff." Emma stayed near the door, her arms still crossed as Max wandered further inside. "This is the house that guy used to live in, right? The inventor?" Max nodded. "Yeah, some old guy who was into all sorts of weird experiments. I read about him in the library archives. No one knows what happened to him, though, just disappeared." Leo was already examining a strange-looking machine that sat in the corner of the room. It looked like a cross between a giant clock and an old radio with dials and knobs sticking out in every direction. "Do you think this was his invention?" he asked, his fingers hovering over the buttons like he was dying to press one. "Don't need touch it," Emma warned, stepping closer. "You don't know what it does." Max laughed, but even he felt a twinge of uncertainty as he looked at the odd machine. "What do you think it is?" Leo squinted, turning one of the knobs gently. "I don't know. Looks like some kind of electrical equipment, maybe for recording or tracking something." Max, ever the adventurer, reached forward and flipped one of the switches. The machine sputtered to life with a hum, the dials spinning wildly as the lights flickered in the dark room. Emma gasped and jumped back, but Leo's face lit up with excitement. "Whoa!" Leo exclaimed. It still worked. Before any of them could react, a low, vibrating hum filled the room, and the machine began to glow, a soft, pulsating light that grew brighter by the second. Max's heart raced as he reached out to touch the machine again, but before his fingers could reach the dial, everything went white. The world around them disappeared in a blinding flash of light, and suddenly they weren't in the dusty old house anymore. Max blinked, disoriented, as the light faded, replaced by bright sunshine and the sounds of people chattering. He rubbed his eyes, trying to make sense of the strange scene in front of him. They were no longer in the abandoned house. In fact, they weren't even in the house. Where are we?" Emma's voice was shaky as she looked around. The three of them stood in the middle of a bustling street, lined with horse-drawn carriages and people dressed in clothes straight out of a history book. Leo, always quick to catch on, looked at his surroundings with wide eyes. Guys, I think we just traveled back in time." Max's heart pounded in his chest as he took in the scene. Cobblestone streets, Victorian-era buildings, and people walking by with parasols and top hats. They had somehow ended up in the 19th century. "This can't be real," Emma whispered, clutching her arms. "This is a dream, right?" Max shook his head, still trying to process what had just happened. "No, I think it's not real." He glanced back at the spot where the time machine had been, but there was nothing there, just the bustling streets of the past. Leo's face broke into a grin. "This is amazing. We actually traveled through time. Do you realize what this means?" Emma snapped her eyes wide with panic. It means we were stuck in the past with no way to get back home. Max's mind raced. Leo might have been excited, but Emma was right. They had no idea how to get back, and they couldn't just wander around 19th century London without causing some kind of trouble. They had to figure out how the time machine worked and fast. We need to find that machine, Max said, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling in his chest. There has to be a way to get back. Leo nodded, his excitement barely contained. I think I saw some parts of the machine's design in the house before we activated it. If I can just find some similar tools or parts here, I might be able to repair it. Maybe it's still hidden in the same spot in this time. Max wasn't sure how any of this worked. Time travel was still just science fiction to him, but Leo was their best bet. All right, let's start looking. As they made their way through the crowded streets, Max couldn't help but feel a strange thrill. They were walking through history, real history, and as scary as it was, part of him couldn't wait to see what they'd find. They wandered through the city, careful to avoid drawing too much attention to themselves. Emma was tense, her eyes constantly darting around as though she expected something terrible to happen at any moment. Max, however, was fascinated by everything around him, the way people spoke, the street vendors selling wares from wooden carts, the children playing with hoops in the street. It was like stepping into a living museum. But Leo remained focused. We need to find something mechanical, he muttered, scanning the buildings for anything that looked like it might have the tools they needed. Maybe a workshop or a blacksmith. Max nodded, though. He had no idea where to start. Do you think you can really fix the time machine with stuff from this time period? Leo hesitated, chewing his lip. I am not sure, but if it's based on basic mechanical principles, there might be a chance. Let's offer. You rewrite, Emma said quietly, still looking over her shoulder. Hours passed, and just as the sun began to dip in the sky, they found what they were looking for, a small workshop at the edge of the city. Its sign advertising clock repair and mechanical instruments. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. Inside, the smell of oil and metal filled the air. An elderly man sat hunched over a workbench, meticulously adjusting the gears of a pocket watch. He barely looked up as they entered. Leo approached cautiously, trying to look as natural as possible. Excuse me, sir, he began. I was wondering if you might have some spare parts or tools. I am working on a project. The man squinted up at Leo, clearly not interested in helping a group of kids. What kind of project? Leo fumbled for an explanation. It said a new type of clock, very advanced. The man eyed him suspiciously, but eventually grunted and waved them toward a shelf full of dusty old tools and parts. Leo wasted no time gathering what he could, selecting pieces that might help them repair the time machine. Emma, meanwhile, hovered by the door, watching the street nervously. We need to hurry, she whispered. I have a bad feeling about this. Leo worked quickly, stuffing gears and metal pieces into his backpack. Max helped where he could, though he had no idea what half the stuff was for. Finally, they had everything they needed, or at least everything Leo thought might help. With a quick thank you to the shopkeeper, they slipped out of the workshop and made their way back to the spot where the machine had first transported them. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, Max, Emma, and Leo hurried back to the location where they had first arrived. Max's heart raced in time with their footsteps, his mind grappling with the absurdity of everything that had happened. Time travel was the stuff of movies and comic books, not real life. But here they were, stuck in the past with only a handful of mechanical parts and the hope that Leo could fix a machine that none of them truly understood. Leo was breathing hard from the weight of his backpack, but his determination was palpable. If I can just find where the machine is hidden, it might not look the same as before, but it's only gotta be here. Emma, her face pale and tense, glanced around nervously. We can never stay here long. People are starting to notice us. We don't truly belong here. Max nodded, scanning the alleyways and side streets as they moved. It was true. They stood out, despite their efforts to blend in. Their clothes, their mannerisms, everything about them screamed out of place. But they had no choice. They had to get back to their own time. As they reached the spot where they had first appeared, Max felt a strange sense of déjà vu. The buildings around them were the same, yet different. The architecture had aged, the details of the past bleeding through the cracks of time. Leo dropped his backpack on the ground and immediately began laying out the parts he had collected. It should be right here, Leo muttered, half to himself. The machine must have been here in the past, or maybe it's buried under the street. Max knelt beside him, eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the device that had transported them. But there was nothing, no strange machinery, no hidden trapdoors, just the stone pavement beneath their feet. Emma bit her lip, her anxiety growing. Leo, you have time for this? What if we never find it? Leo shot her a determined glance. You will just give me a second. Max felt the tension rise between them, the weight of their situation pressing down on them all. He didn't want to admit it, but Emma had a point. What if they couldn't find the machine? What if they were stuck here in the 19th century with no way home? The thought sent a chill down his spine. But Leo wasn't one to give up easily. He worked with fierce concentration, using the tools and parts he had gathered to modify a small portable device he had taken from the old workshop. Max watched as Leo connected wires and adjusted gears, his hands moving with a confidence that Max could only envy. I think, Leo said after a few moments, his brow furrowed in concentration. I think I can replicate the signal. It's not perfect, but it might be enough to trigger the machine if it's still here, hidden. Max glanced at Emma, who was pacing nearby, her eyes darting to the corners of the street, as though expecting someone or something to appear. Okay, Leo, do it. Leo nodded and made the final adjustments, then flicked a switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Max held his breath, heart pounding. But then the air around them seemed to hum with a low vibration, just like before. A faint glow began to shimmer at the edges of their vision, and the familiar feeling of being pulled through space and time washed over them. Hold on, Leo shouted as the light intensified. Max grabbed Emma's hand. Just as the world around them blurred and shifted, the familiar sensation of time slipping away beneath their feet. When the light faded, they found themselves standing in a completely different place. But this time, it wasn't the past that greeted them. It was the future. Max blinked, his eyes adjusting to the harsh, artificial light. They stood in the middle of what looked like a massive city, but nothing like the one they had just left. Skyscrapers stretched high into the sky, their smooth, metallic surfaces gleaming in the bright sunlight. Flying vehicles zoomed overhead, and the streets below bustled with people dressed in sleek, futuristic clothing. Oh my God, Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Where are we now? Leo's eyes were wide with awe. This is the future. We've gone forward in time. Max turned in a slow circle, taking in the sights and sounds of this strange new world. Everything was different. The air felt cleaner, the technology far beyond anything they had ever seen. But there was something else too, an underlying tension in the atmosphere, a sense that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. We need to figure out what happened, Max said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. Why did the machine bring us here? Leo was already examining his portable device again, his fingers flying over the buttons as he tried to make sense of their new surrounding. The time machine must have malfunctioned, or maybe it was trying to show us something. I don't know, but we need to be careful. Emma's gaze flickered around nervously. Careful, we writ in the future. Leo, who knows what kind of dangers are out there? Just as she spoke, a loud explosion rocked the street behind them. Max spun around, heart racing as smoke billowed into the air and people scattered in all directions. A sleek silver vehicle had crashed into one of the buildings, its occupants rushing out and shouting warning. Get down, Leo shouted, pulling Max and Emma behind a nearby wall for cover. They huddled together, watching in stunned silence as chaos unfolded around them. Armed drones buzzed overhead, firing lasers at the fleeing people. It was like something out of a dystopian movie. Max's mind braced. We need to figure out what's now going on. This doesn't tie like the future we were supposed to see. Leo South's face was pale, his eyes darting from side to side as he tried to make sense of it all. I don't trace in the stamline must be broken. Something we did in the past must have caused this. Emma's breath was ragged, her hands gripping Max's arm tightly. We have to fix it. We can't leave the future like this. Max nodded, determination hardening in his chest. Let's find out what went wrong and fix it before it's too late. They moved cautiously through the city, sticking to the shadows to avoid the armed patrols that seemed to dominate the street. It wasn't too long before they overheard conversations that confirmed their worst fears. The timeline had been altered, but not in the way they had expected. Their actions in the past had set off a chain of events that led to the creation of advanced AI technology that eventually turned on humanity. We are responsible for this, Max whispered, his stomach twisting with guilt. It's because of that scientist we helped in the past. His work must have led to this. Leo looked stricken, his eyes wide with realization. We have to go back. We have to undo what we did. Emma shook her head, her expression grim. But how the time machine is broken, and we don't even know how to stop this from happening. Max clenched his fists, his mind racing. They had to find a way to fix the timeline to stop the AI from taking over. But with every step they took, it seemed like the future was spiraling further out of control. Just as they were about to lose hope, they stumbled upon a group of rebels, people fighting against the AI regime. And among them, to their shock, was an older version of Leo. The older Leo looked weary, his face lined with the hardships of a life spent battling the AI. But when he saw the younger trio, his eyes widened in recognition. You read me from the past. Max, Emma, and Leo stood frozen, staring at the older version of their friend. Max's heart raced as the implications sank in they had caused this future. But maybe, just maybe, they could fix it with help from the older Leo. The older Leo led them to a hidden base beneath the city where he explained the situation. The time machine was indeed malfunctioning, but it was still their only way to undo the damage they had caused. If they could go back to the precise moment when they interfered with the scientist's work in the past, they could prevent this dark future from ever happening. Max listened intently, his resolve hardening with every word. Let's do it. We're going back to fix this. The older Leo handed them the final pieces they needed to repair the time machine, and after a tense few hours of work, the device hummed to life once more. Without wasting another moment, Max, Emma, and Leo stepped into the machine, their hearts pounding with both fear and hope. The future was dark, but they had one more chance to make things right. The light enveloped them once more, and the future disappeared.